Entry-level position, 5 years of experience, post-secondary education required, and $15 an hour. No wonder why there's quiet quitting. Young people aren't staying in jobs where they feel undervalued, overworked, and treated poorly. And though Gen Z is getting a bad rap at work, they're the future of the workplace. So what do we need to understand about how they are creating and implementing change in the workforce? You're listening to The Sector, a podcast brought to you by Impact Organizations of Nova Scotia, or IONS, where we demystify what is happening in the community impact sector. We'll talk the good, the bad, and the ugly about what it is to work in nonprofits. I'm your host, Lydia Phillip, and for this conversation, I'm joined with my co-host, Haley Moriarty.
Hello.
In this episode, we will be talking youth engagement, and we'll be talking about some myths around youth, like they are lazy, they're entitled. We'll be talking about power at work and how that affects young people, and we'll be talking about this idea around play and professionalism. And we are joined here by Rena Kulczycki, our guest. Rena Kulczycki is a facilitator and program developer who has worked in youth engagement in Mi'kma'ki and across Turtle Island for over 20 years, focusing on systems change, community youth development, and youth leadership and social change. Rena applies an anti-oppressive and social justice approach, deeply informed by their lived experience as a racialized queer second-generation settler, and alongside generous mentorship of many of the young people they've worked with. Thank you so much for joining us, Rena.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
So this conversation really came about from a blog that Haley wrote earlier this year, which is our most popular blog of all 2024. Mm-hmm. So Haley, can you tell us a little bit about why this started and why it felt important to write about? What was this blog?
Absolutely. So the blog really focused on how young people can advocate for themselves in the workplace. The kind of inspiration behind it was me as, at the time, a 24-year-old, newer to kind of the beginnings of my career, looking around and having different conversations with my friends and my peers and finding myself having the same conversation over and over again of like, hey, actually, like you can just ask for a raise. You're allowed. Nobody will tell you that though. And also you can try and make things better at your workplace by being like, hey, this doesn't feel fair. And sometimes things will actually change if you do. So I wanted to kind of take the platform that we have at IONS to share kind of that sentiment and make a bit of a quote-unquote user guide, kind of focused towards Gen Z just because that was a perspective I was writing from, but definitely focused on, hey, the whole sector can definitely benefit from kind of these types of conversations. And, you know, you don't have to be Gen Z to also feel empowered to ask for a raise and like feel empowered to speak up at work.
And the blog was titled Quiet Quitting or Loudly Advocating, which I think is amazing. Much needed in the workforce. And as we were jamming on this blog together, we got talking a lot about our different experiences with work and like our first kind of like real job. And so, yeah, tell me about your experience with like your first real job. And Rena, I want you to think about that as well and some lessons that you've taken away from that.
My first real job after graduating from university was a not super positive experience for me. It was a really exciting opportunity. I was so excited to be the candidate that was selected for this like position that really was aligned with what I wanted to do with my career and felt like a great jumping off point. And then when I actually got into the job, I realized that my supervisor was not really acting the way that I think a supervisor should act. However, at the time, 21-year-old me was like, well, it's simply there must be something wrong with me. And
of course, yeah, that's what you jumped to.
I'm not doing a good job. So after a couple months of honestly a very severe and rapid decline in my mental health from being harassed at work, they tried to fire me. And I said, no. And I quit that job, which was very scary, like terrifying. And it wasn't something that I was just like, yeah, I'm super empowered to do this and I'm going to quit and be like, no, it was horrifying. And it was everybody in my life saying, Haley, like, you don't deserve to be put through this, actually. Thankfully, I was able to find a better job at IONS and also learn a lot of lessons about how you are allowed to speak up for yourself. And if things are, not great and you're being treated poorly, your mental health is a factor. And if you have the ability, you can quit.
Definitely. I'm like, why do so many young people have these like horror stories of their first jobs and just like being taken advantage of, but it's like seen as some like rite of passage that you have to work 12-hour days. No thanks. What about you, Rena?
Yeah, it's funny when I think about the first real job ever, I'm like, oh, is that like the first job I had when I was 16 working for my uncle inputting computer stuff? No, that's not the first one. I was really fortunate that I got to, or it's interesting, the job that I had, I was working part-time and going to school part-time. I was studying international development, and the job that I had was in international development. And one of the things that became really clear was how different what I was learning in school about processes and what was actually happening in the sector. And the organization I worked for is similar to ION, sort of like an umbrella organization. And for me, when I applied that, Haley, what you said is like, ooh, great, I got selected. For me, it was sort of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it also. But then immediately walking into the job, the imposter syndrome really like kicked in pretty strong. Like, oh, am I the best candidate for this? They want me to do all of these things. And I do have some experience, but is it good enough? So sort of that like newness in the position and what I'm being asked to do while I had a collection of skills to put towards that. I didn't feel entirely confident about all of those things. And then it was constantly just a like perfectionist. Am I doing good enough? I'm not doing good enough. Yeah, for me, that was some of the reality check of what my internal dialogue was doing to me in the work. I thought it was interesting. I just want to play off everything that you said. When you said like your friends are saying you don't deserve to be treated like this. I think it's interesting, just the whole concept of how we work and what's expected. I definitely over the years have seen the like you have to put in more time because the job, particularly around doing work around justice and the things we're committed to, it's like, well, nobody's getting paid a lot. There's never enough time, but we have to do the work because if we don't, who does? And so that idea of, what do we deserve in the work? We do deserve rest. We do deserve to take care of our mental health, but it's often the culture of it isn't necessarily set up that way. And it can be perpetuated in lots of different ways. So that's some of, I think seeing that overworking, expecting more from myself, others expecting more, or the perception that others are expecting more from me. Those are some of the things.
It's like, I wish I also knew all of this, like all of these tidbits that both of you have shared, like out of university, because there's like that imposter syndrome and you're like, this is my first job. I actually don't know what I'm doing. This is so different than school. And then just, that need to like work a lot and like the toll that takes on your body and like your mental health. And I commend you for sure for being like, I quit. Like, I don't deserve this. And I think that's really important for people to know. But again, we like, young people are doing this. And I'm like, go Gen Z. But then also people are like, oh, you're too soft. Like, but I had to go through this. So we're going to hop into some conversation, lots of things. But I'm curious about like, what is your favorite myth about young people in the workforce?
My favorite myth, I think, is like this notion that you don't deserve a raise or you don't deserve like more money or to be compensated fairly for your time, and that you're young, you have new you're fresh out of school, you don't have like your 5+ years of experience or whatever, and because of that, like specifically in the sector too, you shouldn't ask for anything more than what you have. And it's like, well, what if you just tried to ask? What happens then? And I think it's like partially a myth, but also like, well, a lot of the times there are women and marginalized folks who aren't comfortable asking because they're like, well, I don't feel like I meet all of the qualifications, or like I haven't done enough to deserve this raise, or other people don't have as much as I have, so I shouldn't even bother. And there are certain people that are just simply overconfident, and would never feel any sort of a inkling in the back of their mind, like, oh, I don't deserve this. And they just ask for the raise. And I think we should all have that confidence because we deserve it.
I think that idea of young people, their lack of experience in a particular job or position, that's a gap. For me, I think it's really exciting about how young folks can come into, anyone new coming into a system or structure can come with valuable perspective that is outside of that can feed into it. It's like, oh, well, what are your life experiences that you can bring in? And one of the really exciting things that I got to learn about when I was doing a lot of youth engagement, like thinking about youth development, was about how innovation is like a key strength for people in adolescence and young adulthood, the way that our brains are working at that time. It's like we're so much more open to innovating new ideas, doing new things. And that's such an incredible gift to bring to any organization. Like, oh, we need to do, oftentimes, especially in this sector, grants they're like, what are the innovative new things? They're not looking. And I often heard that complaint. It's like, oh, we've been doing the things that are working. Why won't they fund that? And the innovative ideas are coming in often with young people who are like, oh, I've seen these new things. I'm more familiar with the, things that are on the cusp that if I've been sitting in my chair doing the same job for a long time, maybe I'm not as familiar or comfortable with that. And so that idea that young people coming in without experience in a position or a field is a detriment, that's a myth that is a quote unquote favorite, not favorite, because it can be so challenged by the value of young people with bringing in innovation and just a particular place in our human development.
Yeah, I love that young people come and bring all of these different ideas and are innovative. And I think sometimes what that looks like a lot is like entitlement. And so that's one of my favorite myths is like, oh, young people, they expect too much, they want too much, they don't want to work 12-hour days. That's crazy. But there's like such a different context as well that we're like living in and working in that is so different from our parents and like other generations. And so I think that context as well of young people entering the workforce, there's just so many things that are different, and life looks a lot different for young people. And I think those expectations are pretty stagnant with what other generations have seen. So what is different? Like, what do we need to talk about? What do people need to know about what working as a young person in 2024 is like?
The kind of smallest place to start, in my opinion, is probably like just sprinkling in little things at the workplace that kind of challenge or make people think that, people who might have been with the organization for a long time or have been in the workforce for a long time, and maybe they're people that have like, very established families that, they have kids, they have their house, they have, their kind of like life set up. And when there are new people entering into those spaces whose like support system might look different, whose lifestyle might look different. I know for myself, for example, it's, I am a single person that my support system here is my friends. So if my friend needs something, or it's like, hey, my friend is getting their wisdom teeth taken out, and I'm going to be the person to bring them to the hospital. I'm going to like take some wellness time to go help my friend. Like, that looks different than like, people who have families and children. And it might be like a concept that's like different because it's not family leave, but it's like a friend, and just kind of like opening the door to those realities for people who haven't lived that life in maybe a long time or haven't at all. And the importance of kind of like building community and just really starting the conversation small and then working your way up to bigger things.
Definitely. The nuclear family for young people is not the same. It's my pals. It's my friends.
Yep, for sure. I think about, I love that you go to that specific place. I think about bigger picture for me of like the language, what we have learned over decades that we keep learning more about the importance of mental health, spiritual health, like those things that we didn't have the language for that. People were, the systems that we're working in aren't built for those considerations. So when young folks are talking about mental health in a way that is eloquent, informed, the stuff we know about trauma now that we didn't know, weren't talking about 10 years ago, and still people aren't talking about it. But young people are more exposed to that. The research has been happening alongside young people. And so the language, the knowing about so much more of what our human needs are and how our systems and structures aren't built for that, that I think you said earlier, Lydia, is like, well, I had to go through this. It's like, well, yeah, but it doesn't mean that the structure is right, actually.
And I'm sorry that you did.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that I'm soft because I'm asking for what I need, right? It's not a lack of toughness. It's actually somebody advocating for something that is more humane, that is more caring, that is more holistic. Yeah. So I think that's a really important thing, is to value that the world, I think adults know. We've all been young people. There are things that we know about our experiences that our parents or the generation before us didn't know, and that we were, discredited for because of that hierarchy and that kind of power that sits with age and quote unquote experience. But the more often we can, as grown-ups, I don't feel like as grown-ups, as older folks, they're like, oh, right, this is a thing that happens time over time of we have to adjust to the change and the different kind of knowing. And yeah, that there's lots of those things that are just like, oh, yeah, we know more now.
Yeah. I think, too, this can kind of tie into the idea of like, well, I had to do it this really hard way. And again, just like little things that you can have to start the conversations are like when people at your work sometimes are like, oh, I haven't taken a break all day. I haven't taken my lunch, haven't eaten anything, haven't stepped away from my desk. And then that culture kind of becomes like a competition of like, oh, well, if you didn't take a break, then I won't take a break. And then nobody's taking breaks. And then everybody's burnt out, specifically like in the sector where there's already such high levels of burnout anyway. And when you hear those conversations, sometimes you like that gut reaction is like, well, I'm a new person here. And I guess this is what I also have to do. But really it's like, oh, that's kind of sad. Like we should go for a walk. We should like go grab a coffee. I can eat lunch. Like I'll go grab my lunch. We can eat together. And just kind of like challenge that assumption of like, why are we letting ourselves feel like this?
Why are we doing this? And I think that's something as well that like younger people are like pushing back on, and they're like, no, I'm actually not going to work like this. And to like bring it back, you said something, Rena, about like language and like how we know more about mental health and how we're able to like better like advocate for ourselves. I also like come back to like the fact that like our generations have like lived through crisis after crisis after crisis, and like what that does to like a person. And don't know what the stats are, don't know what the numbers are, but it was like how greater like global awareness, like when you're more aware of like what's happening socially and around the world, you're actually like more likely to be depressed. And I was like, well, that seems like duh. But it's sense. Like as like somebody who's like living through like these different like contexts, mental health and well-being starts to come more to the forefront for young people, and then people are like, they're so soft.
Yeah. Wonder why. Yeah, it is. I think about like generationally there have been traumatic events, global events that have happened, but something like just coming through the pandemic period, for one, is an incredible, like during developmental ages, the kind of impact that can have. We know about complex trauma. But also another thing that the pandemic did was it taught us all of the things that we were being told no about were actually possible, right? It's like, no, you can't work from home. Turns out we can. No, we can't have a livable wage for everyone. Actually, we can. We can make these things happen. It's where are we putting the priorities? And it's like, what is the impetus? What's inspiring it? And that's a key thing, I think, when I reflect on what's the thing for folks who are older in workplaces. A key question for me that I ask when I like have that gut, like, oh no, we can't do it that way because blah, 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 all of these things, is to really challenge myself on the why am I saying no? What are the no's? And the exciting thing is to turn to young people and go, these are the reasons I think it's a no. What do you got? Like, let's work. Having that partnership, the wisdom of folks who've been in it to go, this is what we've been working with. These are my perceptions. Let's figure out, I know that there's a better way. We can be a part of building that together. So questioning the why no.
Yeah. I think that's interesting too. A phrase that I kind of go back to a lot, and I've like since university when I was going through business school and being like, I don't understand why everything is so capitalistic and like why we can't just care about people. A phrase that kind of like got me through some of that and still does is, you know, this concept. We always talk about this concept of like dividing up this random pie that needs to be divided. And it's like, actually, we can make more pie. We are allowed to make an additional pie. And kind of that idea of abundance and like, just not having this super restrictive mindset. And in the sector, it's like, well, we don't have funding. We don't have this. And it's like, yes, absolutely. These are huge challenges that we have, but we can creatively make more pie sometimes. And as employees and as younger employees, I'm talking about this innovation. I think that, a lot of young people entering the workforce are like, well, this simply won't do because I can't afford to live. So we're going to have to make some more pie.
Get bacon.
And two, I think like when I think about money or time, it feels like it's often like, well, we don't have enough time to do all those things. It's like, well, time we know is a construct and is perceived differently in different ways. And so using the same analogy is like, well, why are we even eating pie? Why are we making pie? What about cupcakes? It's like, why are we constrained to this particular format? And is there a different way we can think about it where, we think about, well, the funders and the results and the things we have to produce, that's all under that same framework of like production, people as valuable because of what they produce, that material value, that shifting into a different way of looking at things. And why are we thinking about things in terms of resources? True, we live in this system and that's part of our reality. But again, when you talked earlier about what are the little things that we can sprinkle in? And so, what is time? Why is the deadline this? Why, if we run into something that's a reality around this actually should be done differently or could be done better in a different way, but you think we don't have time, well, why are we confined to that particular, who's confining us to that framework? Is there something that we can do differently?
Yeah.
Doing things differently.
Imagine.
Crazy. Who would have thought? But it is very possible. But you often run up to like but we've always done it this way, which is like one of my least favorite things to hear. And it's just so prevalent in like work, like everything that I do. I can't get away from that phrase. So how do you get people to think about doing things differently? It takes a capacity and a willingness to change and to be able to like accept and like listen to new ideas. And often that can be the challenge that like people's ears are closed and they just like won't hear it.
Yeah, I think there can be some sort of like relational aspect to it where you're like, okay, I'm living my own experience, obviously. However, if we frame this in a way that, other people can like kind of like latch onto it, it might be helpful, whether that's, if we were to increase the amount of wellness time or sick time or vacation time or whatever we want to call it at the organization, then I, as a single person, non-homeowner who has to bring my friend to get their wisdom teeth taken out, that would benefit me. However, it would also benefit you, my coworker, who has a sick 8-year-old child at home who, we have flexible policies where you can work from home and you can have time to like bring them to appointments and, just kind of showing how giving people more, having the precedent set to have, more things and like increased total compensation, which we talk about a lot at IONS, that just benefits everybody in the long run. And then the more kind of that trickle down effect, which is, not a great term, but it works. There's a statistic when we talk about like change theory, I think where it's like you don't necessarily need like over 50% buy-in for there really to be like a massive shift in culture. It's more like 30%. And then once you kind of like get to that kind of third, you have enough momentum to keep the thing going. So talking kind of a little bit to what you just said, Lydia, the buy-in can be there from a smaller group and then the little sprinkles throughout to increase the buy-in can actually start on like kind of a smaller level.
Yeah, something that I find exciting is the usefulness of storytelling. And so around the idea of making more room for young people, a story that happens over and over and over again in our history is that young people have been at the forefront of major necessary social change. We think of it like more recently, Black Lives Matter was young adults. But Martin Luther King was under 30 when he was doing a lot of his work.
People are surprised when they hear
him. Like we think of him as like a balding man those particular photos of him as an older person. But young people are frequently, actually most often, at the forefront of the critical change that we need. And so I try to tell the stories of like young people who are doing really cool things, or did you know someone was so like such and such an age, or reminding people about the changes that we've needed have come from young people and their energy and insight, innovation, perspective. I think that's a helpful thing. Just like, and it's the social cultural story changing that happens. Like, oh right, young people are really good at stuff and are visionary and can see change that is necessary and work for it. So we just keep telling those stories.
Yeah, we have these ideas in our head of like, who is leaders? Like, who leads change? And it's often, not young people. And I think when we are talking about a workforce and capitalism, there's this idea around how like young people don't fit this mold of like professionalism and thus like, can you lead change? So that was one of my favorite topics, is like, what is professionalism? And like, why does it not work for most people?
I think a lot of the time, like back to, how, for example, Black women, getting absolutely villainized for having their hair the way it grows out of their head at work, and that being seen as unprofessional, or the way that people dress being seen as unprofessional based on some arbitrary standard that was made up and so colonially.
You're doing great.
Yeah. Rooted in colonialism.
There you go.
And it's just like, why are we still doing this? And we don't have to do it this way. And then, but when you try and kind of push back on that, it's like, in a grander scheme of things, it's like, oh, well, now you're putting a target on yourself to say like, well, now this person isn't professional and we shouldn't listen to them because they're not being professional. And it just feels like such a rabbit hole that's unnecessary to have to deal with.
Yeah, it's like we want youthfulness, like that is like a positive trait without like the youth, without like the young people. When I was chatting with Rena before this episode, we are like talking a lot about professionalism and power, and in preparing to come to the studio and record this, Rena was like, can I dress like a camp counselor or do I have to be like camp director?
Yeah. Do I have to dress like a grown-up for this? Is a thing that I often say, and I've talked about probably 10 years ago. I started saying, I think one of my job requirements, if I'm looking at the work that I'm going to do, it has to be that I never have to dress any fancier than camp director. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to, no, thank you. That's not the box I want to squeeze myself into. And talking about professionalism, it's a box, right? It's like, do you check off these boxes? Can you wear a suit? Can you wear a tie? Can you, and the way that even professionalism and what makes you allowable in the workplace has changed over time. It's like, well, you're wearing a skirt. Probably can't get the job because you're not a man. It was like ages ago a thought that folks were having. And now so much of that has changed about what is allowable or not allowable, what's considered professional. But it's still coming from a particular frame and a box. And it's funny, as we're having this conversation, I'm like, we just need to keep asking why. Why can't we do that? Why? And the more I think that, I'm like, oh yeah, that's the thing that toddlers do. That's the wisdom of 2-year-olds that we get frustrated about. And so why do I have to wear a suit and tie? Why do I have to wear a collared shirt? Why do my shoes need to be polished? Why can't I wear sweatpants?
Why can't I laugh and have fun?
Yeah. Why can't we play? Why does this meeting have to have an agenda and all, timed outcomes, all of those things? Why? It's like, well, why don't we do a check-in around? And that's funny and playful. And how, when we start asking those questions about why are we doing it a different way and can we change it? Can we have more fun? Right? Like there's a point at which, think about adulthood being like coinciding. You get adulthood when you're responsible for things, and being responsible for things means being serious. And no, thank you. I quit being an adult if that is the qualifier. I have to be serious and all the time. Yes, I have to be responsible for things, but if I have to be serious about all the time, and that's what professionalism is, no, I quit that job. No, thank you. Thanks for that inspiration. No. And again, questioning the colonial parameters of what is professionalism and who says I have to be these things. Who am I mimicking? Who does it allow or disallow from being in those structures or being seen as valuable, important, who has authority? Yeah.
Definitely. What lens is this coming from? I think we know the answer.
Yeah.
Let's talk about power as well and how it shows up for younger people in the workforce. And what is power and what does that mean? And how do you advocate for yourself?
I can talk a little bit about just kind of this idea of some experience that I've gone through, and it mentions it in the blog as well, and also I believe in our impact report. Plug for the impact report. Have a look. It's beautiful. It's on our website, ions.ca. I work in comms. Anyway, when I first started at Ions, shortly after I started, I was honestly struggling with the exponential increase in rent and cost of living in Halifax, and my housing situation had recently changed, and there was just a lot of new bills that I was kind of experiencing that was overwhelming and really scary, and I was trying to like budget my way out of it and deal with the fallout that in my personal life. It's like, well, this doesn't have anything to do with my job, but it's like my job is my source of income, and I work in a place where we are values aligned with the people being first. And I was like, okay, I'm going to ask for a cost of living adjustment and see what happens. And it was scary. And I was like, well, they could say no. And then that would result in like me having to figure out something else. But kind of setting myself up for that conversation with my director, being like, okay, what ducks do I need to get in a row of, how do I frame this? How do I explain this to my director that, I deserve this raise and I've worked really hard over the past couple of months and I know I'm new and I'm young and I don't have as much experience. And then, again, at Ions, I know we're very privileged. And I was just like, actually, I'm just going to explain my situation and explain I really am struggling and I feel comfortable explaining that. Can I have a cost of living adjustment to try and like help me out where I'm at? The conversation went really well, and it's the sky didn't fall. Nothing bad happened. Mm-hmm. I was not fired for asking for this, and instead I was able to like work with my director and figure out what could help meet my needs, and maybe what other extra supports I could benefit from. And I was like, wow, I can live and be comfortable and not have to, leave and go find a different job. When you talk about power and, again, you're a young person with less experience, that imposter syndrome is coming in. And it can be scary to like talk to a director about a raise or even a cost of living adjustment or whatever. It's definitely not scary. But the biggest thing I think is like, you will not be fired for asking for something that you need. That is a completely reasonable request to ask any employer. All the time, there's increases in expenses in our real life, and the expectation is that we continue to produce more output every year, more output and more things, and you're creating more things and helping more people and whatever. And it's a very reasonable expectation to be like, hi, if we're doing more work, can I have a little bit more money? And even if it's not possible, asking is not something that you should be completely scared to do for fear of repercussion.
Mm-hmm. And I think that there are a lot of things that you said there, too, that the onus is on folks in positions of power to make themselves more accessible or make those processes that, like, how does someone who's new to the system ask for something that they need? And having that be transparent, I think about the power of organizational culture or even team culture. Of if we've been doing things a certain way for a certain period of time, the person who's been around the longest might have that strong voice being like, this is just the way we've always done it. They're frequently the person who's like training somebody new. And so their perspective and how things are done is sort of like sets the expectation. But if there are organizational systems in place where we're like, okay, well, annually we review this. These are the you have a, tri-annual or like quarterly review of what's happening, that there's support that's in place there, and having transparency. I don't love and don't ever want someone to be like, the systems and policies and procedures to be a box that people are confined to, but they do become opportunities for transparency and orienting to what are the common things that we can expect. And the onus is on folks in positions of authority where power sits and where decision-making power sits to support younger folks or just newer folks in orienting and finding those pathways and being available and not working from like an intimidating place. Like just being a new employee, period, can be you're not in a position of strength. They're not seen as being in a position of strength or power.
Yeah. I think that's another with the transparency piece. When I first started at Ions, we didn't have our pay scales published.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of conversations that happened. And when I was starting, and this cost of living adjustment that I was asking for, and then just trying to get clarity on like, what is the expectation of like, what are people making here? I don't know. I'm scared to ask, but also I'm just going to ask, see what happens. I'm going to say, I make this much. Anybody want to share? And just like trying to start conversations, which is something that is scary and taboo usually, but it shouldn't be taboo. And now we have, at IONS, we have our pay scales published on our website in like a policy format that, other nonprofits hopefully can like avail of and kind of use as a template for themselves. And it's the same thing on our job board. We don't accept jobs that don't have salaries attached.
Mm-hmm.
So we reach out and say, hey, this is going to be rejected because of this. If you'd like to include salary information, highly encourage.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think it's one of those transparency things too. I often talk about youth and young people in systems, like the advocating that we have to do because institutions are structured around the way things used to be, or like for a particular group of people that it's worked for, that when we talk about adjusting systems and structures and ways of being to support the gifts that young people bring into the work and like actually let's benefit from all of that. It's the same kind of language that we use around equity and in any marginalized group, right? Like I can speak about young people in workplaces as being, oppressed by particular systems and structures that are not built to serve them well. And so if we can talk about it in that way, when you're talking about pay equity or publishing pay scale on a job, it's going, oh yeah, who does that then make it accessible to? And also how are we ensuring that what folks are getting paid across the board, that there's equity happening there as well. So it's one of those things like, oh yeah, what are the adjustments that we make that are good for some that are actually end up being good for everyone?
Good for everybody.
Yeah.
Definitely. Rapid fire, why is it important to have young people in the workforce? Why do you need them in your organization?
Because we're cool. And we're funny. And we do silly things that are like, oh, actually, yeah, maybe this isn't so bad. We have a lot to offer. And like we were talking about with, who is at the forefront of different movements throughout history and the innovation. And there's so much joy, I find, as being a young person in a workplace as well, and how I feel lucky to be here and I feel lucky to be on a team of other people that respect me and I respect them. And it's such a symbiotic relationship of me learning and gaining experiences from my coworkers, and then also me seeing my coworkers go, oh yeah, Haley, that's a good point. Like, it's a really, really joyous thing. And you should give us a shot.
Yeah. Innovation is the key word for me. And also just like having more people at the table from different perspectives is valuable, right? Like if we're trying to find solutions to our big questions and problems, let's have more people in on it. And so perspective, innovation, energy, the collaborative process between folks with different perspectives. I think that's it. Yeah.
Definitely. So last question is, what are ways organizations can support youth in the workplace? So what are some of these key ingredients?
Oh, I think one thing that's like from a very tangible place, there are different government grants available. I know for myself, for example, part of my salary at IONS is paid through a Graduate to Opportunities program through the provincial government, which is something that I graduated from university. And then within 2 years, I found this job, and then the funding applies to 25% or something of my salary. And that's just like a very easy way for employers to be like, oh yeah, this is, beneficial for us because we don't have to pay as much of our own money towards the salary, and also beneficial to the young person who's then gaining opportunities and kind of like kickstart their career after graduation. So that's like a super simple thing of, looking into different opportunities of employing young people, honestly.
I'm like thinking in categories, but providing opportunities for growth and learning is a key one, but also shifting the mentality from mentorship into like a two-way mentorship. So it's not just someone who has been around and knows some things sharing their deep wisdom with somebody who's coming in, but also and like shifting that so that there are opportunities to do that reciprocal teaching and learning together. Opportunities to have fun and be silly, not that and not thinking of that as like juvenile or unprofessional, which is like, oh yeah, how can we bring creativity in? How do we spark that? What are peer support networks, I think is important. So, and peer could be your age peers, but it could also be different kinds of like thinking about the similarities that folks have and ways that they connect. So whether it's their job stream or it's their age, how do we support folks to connect to each other, build support? So you're not the only person who's the young person asking for like, what are you guys making?
Yeah.
Can we talk about changing something? It's like, right, how do we build capacity and support, even in just like, partnership with folks as peers? What are other things? Probably many things, but
some flexible work, more mental health days.
Yes. Yeah.
We love a good benefits package.
It's funny. You asked the question about for youth, and I'm like, oh, everything I'm thinking of is actually good for everyone.
Wow.
Case in point.
And there we have the thesis.
Yeah.
Well, I hope we find ourselves playing more and finding joy throughout the day and translating that to everyone around us. I think there's so much that we can offer when we think about things differently and when we have fun and when we start thinking about power differently. So that is my wish for us moving forward. Thank you both for joining and having this conversation.
Thanks for the invitation. It's been really good to sit and chat.
Connect with us on Instagram at IONS Canada or on LinkedIn at Impact Organizations of Nova Scotia and visit the IONS website at ions.ca.